Welcome to our OneGoal April webinar, How Research Demonstrates Impact and Fuels Our Strategy. We're so excited to have you here today. I'm Priya Linson. I'm the Executive Director of OneGoal in Chicago. I've been at OneGoal for almost 9 years, and I'm so happy to welcome so many familiar faces and names here today. So very excited to have you here. I would love to hear a little bit more about where you're all coming from. So we're going to have a poll popping up in just a second. Would love to hear how you're connected to us. Are you partnered with us in some way? Are you supporting OneGoal? Are you on staff? Are you a fellow or alumni? Are you a community member just interested in our work? Please share a little bit in the chat. I'm seeing the results pop in. Looks like we have a lot of people who work in the education sector who are supporting OneGoal or who are connected to us by being a partner, either in a school or at a peer organization. We have a couple of people who are here just as community members as well. Very exciting to see who is here in the room with us. It looks like we have a bunch of you that are OneGoal staff, and I see some former staff members on the name list as well. So glad that you're still connected to us. We're going to be getting started in just a second, but would love to share some basic logistics. I know we're all experts here on Zoom webinar at now a couple of years in from 2020, but just a couple of logistics to get us started. Please share your questions in the chat or the Q&A button. Either of those buttons are fine. Throughout, we'll try to answer questions as we're going along, but if we don't get to your question as we're going through the panel discussion, we'll have time for Q&A at the end, and we'll really try to get to all those questions at the end. We're also recording this session, and so if you have to step away, or if somebody else that you're talking to is interested in this content, you'll receive a copy of this. As long as you're registered, you'll receive a copy of this recording in your email afterward. And we're also going to be sharing links with you throughout just to help you kind of be able to dig into content on your own. So keep an eye on the chat. There will be links coming your way that could be helpful. So as we get started, I'm really excited to share with you the incredible group of experts that we have. I already introduced myself, but if you've just jumped in, my name is Priya Linson. I'm the Executive Director of OneGoal here in Chicago. I'll be moderating this conversation and kind of navigating where we're going today. We also have with us today our Chief Program Officer, Carla, who is stepping in for Melissa Connolly, our CEO, who had a family emergency. Carla, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so lucky to have your expert voice in the room. We also have Dr. Kelly Hallberg from the U Chicago Inclusive Economy Labs, who oversaw the newly released evaluation about OneGoal's impact that you all got a sneak preview of in your email. And we've invited two leaders from different sectors who both sit on OneGoal regional boards. We're so excited to have here Dr. Tim Rennick, who's done incredible work to increase graduation rates among students of color in Georgia, and is actually on our Atlanta board. So we're very excited to have you here, Tim. And then we also have Ira Handler, who's an impact investor, sits on our New York City board, and is the founding partner of New Holland Capital. Very exciting to have both of you here. And then lastly, we have our Managing Director of Program Learning, Dr. Keith Sander, who's going to be talking a little bit about our internal research. So really great to have all of you here. They'll be jumping on, their faces will be popping on the webinar shortly, but I wanted to just take a couple of minutes to walk through who we are at OneGoal. Some of you might be new to our work. Our mission is simple. It's to close the degree divide in America. We are not satisfied that And we're not satisfied that students from the lowest income quartile don't have the same opportunities to complete a degree or credential at the same rate as their higher income peers. And our vision is that every young person, regardless of their zip code or their family income, will have an equitable opportunity to achieve their greatest post-secondary aspirations. A little bit about our model. Our approach is predicated on the belief that the post-secondary landscape is complex. And when you think about students that are the most vulnerable, those are at the intersection between coming from low-income communities, those that are students of color, and those that are first-generation students. Once students have multiple of those risk factors, we believe that college and career planning really can support these students if it's embedded during the school day and is truly a critical component of the high school experience. We solve for selection bias by offering an in-school solution that offers critical support through the transition between high school and a post-secondary pathway, which really prioritizes strong relationships between practitioners and young people. Lastly, we have partnered with hundreds of schools and districts across the country, which in a program that integrates post-secondary planning into the school day, rather than adding an extracurricular activity. Our model is a 3-year program, which essentially ensures that students get high-touch support in their last 2 years of high school, as well as their first year of a post-secondary pathway. And then our program is actually taught by an educator. So across the country, teachers are teaching OneGoal in the classroom as a credit-bearing class, which builds community and trust amongst groups of students and ensures that they're building a small family in their cohorts as they support one another through their post-secondary journeys. So if you look ahead at this map, which is popping up on your screen, OneGoal started here in Chicago as an after-school program, a tiny after-school program that served just 32 students in Chicago. And now that we are gearing up to enter our 15th year of supporting students in Chicago, you can also see that we have reached students across the nation in 6 regions and in some statewide, in some areas outside of our core regions as well. We are serving approximately 13,500 students across the country today and are currently examining ways that we can continue to innovate and grow our work by partnering with entire school systems in ways that can increase college and career readiness for students across our country. So why are we here today? We're here today specifically to talk about how we use data to inform strategy and to achieve results. So I'd love to welcome Carla, our Chief Program Officer, to join me. Hi, Carla.
Hi, Priya. Hello, everybody.
So nice to have you here. Thanks for joining. I'd love to hear from you, Carla. What, especially from your seat as Chief Program Officer, why is it so important for OneGoal to be a learning organization?
Thanks, Priya. And it's nice to be with you here all today. Priya, the way I see it, being a learning organization is absolutely critical to and almost an ethical responsibility of who we are as an organization, as a nonprofit. In the for-profit work, profit is the bottom line. It's a way in which organizations can develop signals to identify whether or not they need to make shifts in their practices. And quite frankly, in the nonprofit sector, it's just not that clear. And so for us to be able to invest in evaluation and learning in a way that becomes ethically important to our work provides us the ability to really uncover the signals that we need that we don't get because we don't produce the traditional profit bottom line, to be able to understand what is the impact that we're really having on the population that we care most about, and then where are the adjustments that we need to be making to make sure that we are doing right by these students and improving our programs and practices. Being a learning organization is also, I think, critical to our ability to prioritize how we are able to scale with fidelity what we know works. We know that we're not going to close the degree divide in this country, which is what we aim to do, without making bold decisions to serve more students. And we know that we can't serve these students effectively if we're not able to get really clear on what works and why, and therefore being able to scale those practices into additional systems and states and structures And so learning is at the cornerstone of our ability to be able to do all of that.
Thanks, Carla. You talked a little bit, you mentioned a couple of times, what works? We need to know what works. I know we're going to hear a lot more from you on that subject later. But thanks for giving us that overview. I want to turn to how we bring this idea of being a learning organization to life, and welcome in Keith Zander, who leads our program learning team, into the conversation to talk a little bit about what this looks like at OneGoal.
Thanks so much, Priya. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all today.
Thank you. Can you, tell us a little bit about your approach to research?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So we'll start out with what I think is the foundation for all of our internal learning work at OneGoal, which is our program learning team. So I came to OneGoal almost a decade ago as one of the first hires on staff. I think I was right around hire number 15, and we're now, over 170 folks. And so OneGoal invested early in program learning efforts internally, which is, I would say, pretty rare for a growing and startup nonprofit, and have since then continued to invest. So we now have a team of 5, including me, of internal, professionally trained applied researchers, all who have advanced degrees in training and educational research, as well as hands-on experience working in the K through 16 education field. And when we bring folks onto our team, we tell them that it's about 50% technical work in terms of conducting rigorous evaluation and research, and about 50% collaboration and working directly with stakeholders and practitioners to engage in that work. And so it's truly applied internal research, and we have a really robust team of internal experts to carry that out. I think one of the second things that makes our internal learning work strong and unique is an emphasis on both quantitative and qualitative research. So historically, in the social sciences and the educational research fields, there's a heavy bias towards quantitative research. And quantitative research certainly has a place in both internal and external learning efforts, and we'll talk a lot about a quantitative effort in terms of the IL study today. But internally, we also really try to balance those quantitative efforts with qualitative research and think about different sources of knowledge and different sources of truth to take a more holistic look at what is working and what isn't. And qualitative research really helps us elevate the voices of our stakeholders, particularly students and teachers and our partners, when we're making strategic decisions and allocating resources internally. A third big piece of our internal learning efforts is actually external collaboration. So as I mentioned, we do have a really robust team internally, but we make it a point with a variety of our projects to partner with external researchers and experts to strengthen and directly inform our work and ensure that we're keeping up with sort of best practices and knowledge in the post-secondary access and success space. And then lastly, and probably most important, is that our program learning work is applied, right? Which means that it needs to be put into action. So we're not doing our learning work to create a report to sit on a shelf somewhere that someone reads once. We are creating and engaging in learning work that is meant to directly inform decision-making. So the 2 ways we do that is, one, by learning and testing smaller pilots and innovations that we're thinking about scaling to our broader core model. So we make sure that we're learning as we're innovating, both during and after a pilot, to say what worked and what didn't, and what shouldn't we scale. And then we also engage in a continuous improvement process on our core model. So continuously looking at and tweaking what we know works and seeing how we can strengthen that more effectively.
Thanks for that overview, Keith. Can you bring us under the hood a little bit with what the internal research your team has been leading over the past several years, and how it's influenced that last piece you were talking about, impact and action? How is your team leading the effort to both lead research and then move promising practices into the field?
Sure, thanks for that question, Priya. Yeah, I'd be happy to share just a handful of examples of the incredible work the program learning team has done over the past decade here at OneGoal. So first example I'd like to share is actually the first external study we did, which was about 8 years ago now, also with the University of Chicago, that really was the first external objective look at the impact of OneGoal on student outcomes. And the findings from that study really fed into our growth from a single site organization in Chicago, as you mentioned, where we started, to the 6 regions that we now serve. Another example of internal research we've done is our Pillars of Fellow Success curriculum audit, which was a mixed methods internal research design that included a really robust audit of our curriculum that examined what non-cognitive abilities does our curriculum focus on and when, and to what degree is that aligned with the framework of non-cognitive skills that we as an organization say we want to focus on with our students that are really important in their post-secondary journey. The result of that study was a refining of our framework from 9 pillars to 5, and a really robust modification to our curriculum to ensure that those 5 pillars were represented equitably across our curriculum. A third example to share is another external partnership, which was working directly with Dr. Rennick and his colleagues at GSU. It was a 2-year partnership that included both site visits and qualitative research and focus groups to better understand organizational practices at GSU that are driving their incredible outcomes, as well as sharing our quantitative data with them to engage in some really robust machine learning predictive analytics to help us identify what are the biggest predictors that we capture internally at OneGoal that predict post-secondary success. And we have since used that information to directly inform our benchmarks and KPIs, our leading indicators and outcomes that we focus on as an org, as well as the information we present back to students. A fourth example is our quality enrollment framework, which is our evolved framework for how we define and calculate match and fit for students when they're making their post-secondary choices. And that, again, was based on a mixed methods approach, so some quantitative analysis, some qualitative interviews with fellows and PDs to build out a much more holistic framework that fellows and students and PDs can engage in as they're building their college lists, applying to schools, and making an enrollment decision. And then finally, most recently, a root cause study that was an incredibly robust qualitative internal study where we interviewed over 40 fellows, alumni fellows, who at one point were enrolled but had stopped out of their post-secondary pathway, which is a population of students that's been historically, sort of passed over, I would say, in the broader field of education research. And we were able to engage in really deep qualitative study with those students to learn about their experiences, what was supportive of their pathway, what wasn't, and have baked that information directly into our 2025 strategic plan as we move forward into the next couple of years.
Keith, you and I started around the same time, and I'll never forget, we sat near each other in our old office, and this is a significant body of work that you have been a part of leading, that you've truly led in building our program learning muscle here at OneGoal. And I've personally seen the impact of every single one of these pieces of research. Thanks for walking through that with us. And I loved how you shared a little bit earlier why it's so important for us to be partnering with external researchers. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about this most recent study. So we're going to turn over to Kelly to talk a little bit about the study on OneGoal's impact most recently conducted by the U Chicago Inclusive Economy Lab. This study was released last week. Hi, Kelly.
Hello.
Nice to have you here. I'm so excited to have you share a little bit more about the work that your team has led to support our learning as well. Could you tell us a little bit about both yourself and the methodology of the study?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Priya, and thanks more generally for the partnership that OneGoal has with the Inclusive Economy Lab. I think as a researcher, I'm always very acutely aware that the work that I do doesn't have an impact in the world unless someone does something with the information we're generating and making change. And so I think when I think about an organization like OneGoal, who's really made learning, and not only learning, but having learning drive what you do and what you do in practice as a partner is sort of critically important to us being able to live our mission as well. So I'm the scientific director for the Inclusive Economy Lab at the University of Chicago. We're one of the 5 urban labs at the university. And our work is really designed to increase economic mobility. And so this study in particular really helps us understand what supports are needed and are most effective in helping students from low-income households and students of color navigate the many systemic challenges to college enrollment and completion that they too often face. And in addition to our deep partnership with OneGoal, this work was really made possible by our partnership with Chicago Public Schools. So through CPS, we're able to have access to data that allows us to track OneGoal fellows through high school and college. So we look at fellows who are expected to graduate from high school between 2011 and 2020. And then to be able to really isolate the effect of the OneGoal program as rigorously as possible, we use a statistical approach that's called propensity score matching. I will not bore you with the details of what propensity score matching means, but essentially what this allows us to do is compare the OneGoal fellows to students who are similar, that attended the same high schools, had similar demographic characteristics, similar academic characteristics, came from similar neighborhoods within Chicago. And we're able to compare the folks who had OneGoal to those who didn't, but had all those same characteristics. And while inevitably there are going to be some differences between those two groups that we're not able to control for in the data, this is sort of the most rigorous approach that we can take, short of a randomized control trial, to be able to really isolate the effect of the OneGoal program.
Thanks so much for putting that into lay terms for us, Kelly. Appreciate that. I know that that you mentioned the relationship with CPS. That kind of access to data across a school system is quite rare, isn't it?
It really is, and I think it undergirds so much of the work that we do. And I think like all of the results from this study and from the other work that we do, we also share back with district staff and staff in the schools. And so it not only can drive the work that OneGoal does, but also the work that the district's doing in serving students. So it is a really unique and sort of critically important for being able to do this work.
Awesome. Well, I know that many of our guests had a chance to at least dig in high level to the study results that came in email inboxes last week. But Kelly, tell us what you found.
Yeah, so I've been working with OneGoal for some time, and so I expected positive results, but the results actually surprised even our expectations. So we find sort of across the board that the OneGoal program has strong, positive, and statistically significant effects on almost every academic outcome that we looked at. So in particular, we see really large increases in enrollment in college, persistence in college, and graduation. But then there were some academic outcomes that were even a little surprising to us, one of which is the high school graduation effect. So, we kind of expected to see movement on college enrollment, persistence, and graduation because that is a big focus of OneGoal's model. But we also saw a 15.5 percentage point increase in high school graduation. And I think, for me, this is just evidence that when you help students have a plan, to have a realistic plan that they know how to implement when they're in high school, that it can actually help them even engage in those high school classes. It makes them want to show up. We saw that attendance was higher, that GPAs were higher, so that it has an immediate effect on their ability to engage in high school, and then that persists through these college outcomes that we're so excited about.
Thanks for that overview, Kelly. You mentioned at the beginning when you started talking about these results that you expected there to be some impact, but that you were also surprised by what you saw. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think sort of twofold. So there was definitely the high school graduation results, which I don't think I would have predicted going in, that we would see that much movement on high school graduation. Also, I've been working in education research for some time, and the magnitude of these effects are quite large relative to what we often see. And if you think about sort of all of the things that come together to influence whether a student is going to go to college and be successful in college, and we're able to just isolate the effect of OneGoal on that, to see a 46% increase in enrollment, a 47% increase in persistence, and a 40% increase in graduation was really remarkable. And so, I think it's the magnitude and also the sort of consistency across all of these outcomes that was really surprising and exciting. And I think I've shared this with you, Priya, but it made us go back and like say, okay, let's make sure we did everything before we share this. Let's make sure we did everything right and kick the tires, because we want this to be the case if we're going to go on the record and share these results.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that anecdote. Before we dive in, I know we're getting a couple of questions. Before we dive into some details, what you talked a little bit about some meaning you were making based on sort of what you saw from the high school graduation rate. But I'd be very curious to hear, like, what as a whole, what meaning are you making of this data, and what path forward do you see as a researcher?
Yeah, so I mean, I think of the findings from this study in the context of sort of this growing literature around holistic supports for students that move their college enrollment, persistence, and graduation outcomes. So across a couple different studies now, we're really seeing this growing literature that says, like, when you offer comprehensive supports that are well targeted to the needs of students and the multiple needs of students. So it's not just academic support. It's not just helping students navigate the financial aid process or getting through the application process, but it's sort of all of those things and helping students build a college mindset and be ready to be successful on campus, that these programs that really touch the multiple aspects of college going, that's where we're seeing the most promising and exciting results. And I think, the OneGoal findings for me just sort of are like underlining that takeaway, that it is these holistic and comprehensive supports that can move the needle.
Kelly, we're getting a question in the Q&A about full-time or part-time status of students who were in a post-secondary journey during this study. Quoting the question, is the year-to-year persistence full-time enrollment? Do some change their status to part-time? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so the way that persistence is defined in the analyses that we've done to date is just looking at any enrollment. So it could be that the students for some of the terms are part-time enrolled. I think because we're seeing the movement on graduation, that probably means that many of them were full-time enrolled to be able to accrue enough credits to graduate from college within 5 years. But absolutely, it includes both students who are full-time enrolled and part-time enrolled.
Awesome. Thanks. We're also getting a question about the actual rates for college enrollment, persistence, and graduation in not just the percent increase. Is there anything that you can share there?
Yes, although I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me and I do not want to misquote them. So let me pull this up and I apologize for not having them in front of me.
Well, one thing that I can tell you from our internal research is that we see that OneGoal Fellows as a whole across the country typically are completing at approximately 1.5 times the rate of their peers. So the average for most urban districts is approximately 22% completion. Across DPS, we see about a 20% completion rate. OneGoal Fellows are completing at approximately a 32% completion, so 1.5 times the rate of their peers. And that's across the entire system. Kelly, does that?
Yeah, that sounds completely consistent with the rates that we saw in this study.
Great.
So sorry. So yeah, when we look at scrolling, I just want to make sure so college enrollment, the OneGoal Fellows in our study sample were enrolling in college, about 67% of them, compared to about 46% of the control group. And then when we look at persistence, we're about 50% of the OneGoal Fellows in our study sample were persisting, compared to about 1/3 of the comparison group. And then graduation rates, your numbers were right on, Priya. So in our study sample, we see that about 28%, 29% of students are graduating from college, compared to about 20% of the comparison group.
This study was very specific to Chicago, but the Chicago footprint is quite large compared to the rest of OneGoal nationally. And so OneGoal Chicago fellows and similarly their completion rates are pulling into our national data at large rates, just so that our audience understands sort of we're going to see that kind of consistency in our data. And we know that the post-secondary landscape looks different from region to region. Well, Kelly, that was really helpful start. I'm sure that others are going to have questions for you as we go into open Q&A. And if you do have questions, please add those questions to the Q&A or to the open chat. Would love to hear from Tim and Ira as board members in 2 outside of Chicago regions and also as experts in 2 different fields. Would love to hear a little bit from you. Tim, welcome. So nice to have you here today.
My pleasure. Good to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I'm a big supporter of OneGoal, and we've enjoyed our partnership both through Georgia State and Achieve Atlanta, as well as some of the research we've done with you guys. Yeah, I think my observation is as follows, that this is good research in 2 ways. One we've talked about, and the other I want to emphasize. It's good research in the sense that it has been conducted in a careful way, and it shows us something that we didn't know before. We knew anecdotally certain aspects of the OneGoal treatment was working effectively, but we didn't really have this collective longitudinal look, and we didn't have the numbers attached to it. So that's really good and important research in and of itself. But what I want to say a few words about is something we've talked about briefly. Another definition of good research is research that doesn't sit on a shelf, but actually informs our next steps and our activities. And when I look at this research, that's exactly what I see. I see opportunities ahead to perfect the OneGoal model, to perhaps extend it in ways that it hasn't been extended previously. Let me emphasize one set of data that I find particularly significant, that we've talked about these, that if you look at the percent of OneGoal students who are enrolling directly into college, the treatment group, the OneGoal students, are performing 20 percentage points better than the comparative group, the non-OneGoal students. If you then look basically a year later and say how many of those students who started college are persisting, that number goes down slightly to about 16% lead over the control group, the students who were not engaged in OneGoal. And then if you track out for 6 years and ask how many of those students graduated, the lead goes down to only 8 percentage points. Now that's still a really important, significant outcome, statistically significant by any measure, but it also points our attention to an area of focus, that if we are to serve our students and make sure that the gains that OneGoal is achieving for them through high school and the first year of college are sustainable, we probably have to look at what's happening in years 3 through 6 or 2 through 6 after the OneGoal intervention has pretty much ceased. And we also have to look more carefully at the type of institutions in which OneGoal students are enrolling. What kind of colleges and universities are they enrolling in? In my work at the National Institute for Student Success, we're working with campuses that in many cases look very similar on the surface. They have similar demographics, they have the same kind of role, they're a big urban university. But in some cases, the graduation rates for specific demographic groups, for instance, for Black students, or more specifically for Black males, may differ by a 10-to-1 ratio. They may be 7 or 8% on one campus and 60% on another campus. And what it tells me, what this research tells me, is there's good progress to be made in focusing more on which post-secondary institutions OneGoal students enroll in and what kind of track record they have with regard to success. Because we don't want to lose that 18 percentage point lead that the students have after 1 year of college by the time they're getting their credential. We want to make sure they continue to have supports. Another way of looking at this data, another avenue might be to say, what could we do with these students after the first year? The first year of college, they're holding on to most of the gains that they had in enrolling in college. That drops off over time. So maybe there are some interventions we could consider in years 2 through 6 as well. So that's what I see in the research, not only good, important information to us to have and take away, but also a kind of directions for the next step to improve one goal even further.
I love hearing that, Tim, because we think a lot when we look at our data, when we think about moves for the future and for the present. One of the things we constantly come back to is, for whom is OneGoal not working? For whom could OneGoal work better? We know that we're having great results for the most part. And we also know that our students, being the most vulnerable students that we serve, need an extra layer of support. And so those questions that you ask, how could we make shifts to our program model in order to not lose the momentum, are exactly the kind of questions we're asking internally. Ira, good to see you here today.
Hi, Priya.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Well, you're a social impact investor, so you're used to looking at complex data. Based on your background, what are you making meaning of when you look at this data?
Thanks, Priya. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So as a philanthropist, I always focus on the benefit versus the cost. And so the work here is taking the results from this study and then estimating from that the dollar benefits for OneGoal fellows versus their matches, and then thinking about the costs. So I use the outcomes that are you show on this slide versus the matched students, and I combine that with earnings from the U.S. Census, and using the two, I can basically estimate that somebody who goes through OneGoal, the average person that is part of the OneGoal program, is likely to earn approximately $100,000 more over a lifetime than their matched peer.
That's not insignificant, Ira. That's a significant number.
Exactly, it's a very big number. It's essentially it's like an advantage of approximately 15% versus the matched student. So it's a really big number, and even more importantly for me, when you think about that relative to the cost of the OneGoal program, which let's call it $3,000, the ratio of the benefits to cost is really large, very significant. And having done this analysis for a number of college access and college success programs, I can tell you that OneGoal compares extremely favorably relative to other competitors in the same space.
That's so helpful to hear. You're definitely, you have knowledge of what's out there. And that $3,000 that you just mentioned, the cost, you're looking at an sort of average cost of about $1,000 per student per year across our 3-year program. Is that how you're looking at that number?
Exactly. And that's based on Chicago, just so you know.
Yes.
Because
yep, so helpful. And that number does change across the state, but in a region that is sort of already at scale, we've been serving students for 15 years, have served 10,000 students total across our region's history, that we've been able to kind of find that number and sort of stick to it, at about $1,000 per student per year. So that's exactly right. Well, I'd love to also hear what Carla has to say on the same exact topic. So Tim and Ira, it was helpful from your two perspectives, what meaning you're making of this data, especially as investors of both time and resources. Carla, same question. What, as Chief Program Officer, somebody who's who's one of the architects of our future strategy, what are you making out of this data?
Thanks, Priya. Well, I'll tell you, selfishly, as someone who's joined OneGoal about 6 months ago, this data is like absolutely underscoring that I made one of the best decisions in my professional life to join an organization like OneGoal. So selfishly, that's what I'm making meaning of this data around. I've worked in the post-secondary access and success space for about 18 years now, and I'll tell you that what this data highlights is definitely positioning OneGoal among the most impactful organizations in this space. I've had the honor to work with multiple different college access and success organizations, and we haven't been able to quantify our impact in the way that OneGoal has been able to with the study. This slide here, this visual in particular, I think is a visual representation of like the real lives and the real impact that we're having across our program. I see each one of these dots as real students who we're having a real significant and sometimes even life-altering impact on. And while we've always measured impact both internally and with other partners across the history of OneGoal, this is the first time that a rigorous external evaluation helps us truly understand the long-term impact that we're seeing on thousands of fellows who have been sitting in your classrooms in Chicago from the beginning of time. And so to me, that's powerful that this data is able to help us identify that. And to Tim's point, it's helping us identify the opportunities of where we can continue to grow and improve. I want to underscore that what Keith had shared earlier, that as an organization, we have taken a very much data-driven approach to our work, often prioritizing really doing the work that we know works. And in situations where we've identified that we're not having the outcomes that we are wanting to produce, we are first to say that we are going to pivot and refocus our strategies in ways that we think the data is helping us identify opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, I think I want to like lean in there because this is something that Tim brought up. I'm seeing it in the chat as well. If we're making a really significant impact, over 20 percentage points on enrollment, but are seeing that impact decline by the time completion comes around, what do you make of that? And what does that mean for the future of our program?
Yeah, I think that's great. And a lot of the points Tim made, I'm glad really much aligned with our 2025 strategic plan and where we're going. And so what you'll see on this slide is some of those enhancements to our program that we will be making here throughout the course of the next 2 to 3 years. While in that previous slide, we saw that we were having an impact on high school graduation, college enrollment, and even degree attainment. We know that there are still students in our classrooms that we need to do better by. And so to your point earlier around continuing to interrogate our programs and asking us the question, for whom can OneGoal do better and in what ways, is really going to be the focus of how we develop program at OneGoal for the next unforeseeable future. As you can see here, like our high school efforts, to Tim's point, are going to continue to prioritize how we support students in enrolling in high quality pathways and their ability to be in their own driver's seat to ensure their post-secondary success. We know that not all institutions are created equally and that some of them are serving our students better than others. And so it is our responsibility to be able to almost be borderline obsessed, I think, with ensuring our students have the broad set of high quality post-secondary enrollment options that are inclusive of important components that often we don't think about when we are helping support students to make these life-altering decisions, which are financial fit, academic match, personal fit, and the particular institution's track record with supporting students from the similar backgrounds as the ones that we are having in our classrooms every day.
So tell us a little bit, where I know we got a question. You're starting to go here already. What that means for the different kinds of supports that we can offer to students beyond their first year.
Yeah, so I think it's twofold, right? It's really doubling down on making sure that we are not only putting in front of our students the traditional 2 and 4 year post-secondary pathway options. We know that in our sector, that's not been finding alternative and progressive pathways has not been part of like what we do really well. And so I'm really excited that OneGoal is really investing in making sure that our students have what they need to also have alternative and progressive pathway options as they're thinking about their post-secondary journeys. I think you in Chicago, in the Chicago region, and a couple of our other regions are doing some great work around piloting what it actually looks like to put these high quality progressive and alternative pathways in front of our students. And in just that one pilot that you've been doing this in this short time, we've already seen some incredible increases. I think it was like 9 percentage points in enrollment because of us being able to introduce these additional high quality pathway opportunities. And I think the other thing to your point on like how else can we support students is we know that for some, our 3-year model is absolutely, as the data has shown, providing significant, robust impact. And it's all they really needed to be able to then go on, enroll, persist, and complete. But we also know that there's a good number of our students that having only access to OneGoal for 3 years is just not enough, right? And so to the question of for whom can OneGoal do better, we are also doubling down and thinking about who do we need to differentiate our post-secondary success supports for well past that 3rd year. And then what does that look like? What does that look like from a scalable, cost-effective, direct advising solution? And then us being able to therefore provide them with the community that they need, that they really don't no longer have because they're outside of this traditional 3-year cohort that we've established, well into their post-secondary journey. And that is the play that we're making to ensure that we are really closing that degree divide that we know is absolutely pervasive and unjust. And really the reason why OneGoal exists is to ultimately close that divide. And then the third component of this slide here is that we could do that every day. We can continue to have these classroom cohorts in and go the traditional OneGoal approach to closing the degree divide. But truly being able to do that in our lifetime will require us to think about how do we have this similar impact at the systems level. And so we have a whole team across OneGoal. And then as we continue to develop our 2025 vision, to think about how do we now also target system level approaches, inclusive of providing systems leader with robust coaching and support to have similar impacts in their own post-secondary enrollment, persistence, and completion efforts.
Awesome, Carla. We're getting so many questions for all of you in the chat. And so I'm actually going to invite Keith and Kelly to join us back here so that we can see everybody and make sure that we can get to all of your questions. So this is such an incredible panel of folks, and we have so many questions for you. I'd love to start with Keith. We're getting a question if there are plans to try and replicate these results in other cities or districts.
Certainly, yeah, I would say in the long term with 100%. I think it's entirely a matter of sample size and how long we have been in a given region that would provide the sufficient statistical power to conduct the robust analysis that was used for this study. So Houston is our second most historical region, and they've been around for the second longest time. And so they're getting close to that threshold of having enough students past that 6-year completion mark, but there's opportunities to look at enrollment and persistence first, like we did in Chicago, and then eventually completion. So yes, I would say there's definitely plans in place, and it's just a matter of time.
Awesome. I could go down that road with a number of other questions, but I'm going to switch gears for 1 second so we can go back and hear from Ira. Ira, a question for you is the 100K increase in earning over a lifetime for a OneGoal student, comparing OneGoal fellows versus those students who didn't enroll in college or graduate from college. Could you please elaborate? Oh, you're on mute.
Priya, that's exactly the right question to ask. So basically the calculation looks at all the outcomes that were elaborated in Kelly's study, which include not graduating high school, stopping with a high school degree, some college, meaning enrolled in college but didn't finish, a 2-year degree, graduated, and a 4-year degree. And so basically we look at the population of OneGoal and all the outcomes for the OneGoal students, and we look at the outcomes for all the OneGoal matched students, and it's the difference between those two that generates that $100,000 difference over a lifetime.
Awesome. So helpful. And there's some research coming out of places like Georgetown that helps to see sort of the potential lifetime earnings based on different levels of degree attainment. So for those of you in the audience interested, you can find those results too that are helping to drive our understanding of impact based on lifetime earnings. Thanks for that, Ira. There's a couple of questions here about the challenges of degree completion for this vulnerable student population. So one question is the degree completion rate not where it could be because of lack of financial aid to complete college? Might there be other reasons as well? I think this could be a combination of hearing from you, Tim, also Carla and Keith on our team. So Tim, I'd love to start with sort of the broader space since you're in the post-secondary space as well. What kind of roadblocks do you see in place for young people that are similar to the ones that OneGoal serves?
Yeah, absolutely. Finances are a critical factor, maybe ranking high on the list. But as OneGoal has proven with its interventions, the holistic approach, there are as many reasons students drop out of college as there are students who drop out, right? There are all kinds of different life circumstances. We have students who are parents and lack childcare support. We have students who struggle academically, who don't have the sufficient background to succeed in their critical college level courses. We have students who have personal issues that interfere with their momentum, family obligations, counseling stresses, and so forth. But I think what is promising is there are now, just as OneGoal has produced evidence-based research showing that its interventions and supports work in a transformative way, there are post-secondary examples of that as well. And what we can be is more intentional about linking the OneGoal students to those success stories at the college level. I know one of the questions in the chat is, what are some examples? Well, the CUNY ASAP program, and OneGoal is strong in New York City, has shown that with very similar students, mostly low-income first-generation college students, mostly students of color, you can increase the likelihood that the students will attain a college degree within a short period of time, not only 6 years, but 3 to 4 years, by not 5% or 10%, by 50 or 60%. Georgia State has its own program in community colleges in Atlanta, where we've taken graduation rates for Black students that were in the 10% range, and over a few-year period with the holistic supports, turned those graduation rates into 60 or 70% rates. So it's that kind of matching that can potentially give students the same kind of holistic supports they've received through OneGoal once they transfer to college. Financial support, academic advising, counseling, tracking, use of predictive analytics, and other sorts of resources to make sure the students keep on track.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. Keith, I'm going to toss it to you next. Same question, but more of a OneGoal perspective. You talked a little earlier when we were chatting up front about one of the pieces of research that your team led, which was the root cause analysis for non-completion. So your team deeply knows and understands what happens sort of between enrollment and potentially not completing a degree. What did you find?
Sure. Thanks, Priya. So again, that study was based on over 40 interviews with students who had been enrolled but stopped out to more deeply understand their experiences. And the biggest two factors that they highlighted as contributing to that decision, or as Tim mentioned, were financial factors. So that included lack of understanding of their institution's financial requirements and practices, inability to pay off account balances, inability to meet basic needs, or to receive the transportation they needed to get to campus. So that was the biggest bucket of contributing factors, followed very closely by social and emotional factors. So that included mental health challenges, lack of social belonging and social capital, and having to take care of things for their family or siblings in addition to their academic responsibilities. And then the third biggest factor was sort of around aspiration and a mismatch between what the student ultimately wanted to do or saw for themselves and where they were currently enrolled. Which is exactly why OneGoal is investing heavily in alternative and high quality progressive pathways to ensure that we have options for students who don't see 2-year and 4-year institutions as the best fit for them and their long-term career goals. And most notably, I would call out, it might be surprising for some folks, maybe outside of this space, is that academic factors or feeling underprepared academically was actually the smallest factor that contributed oftentimes to students stopping out, which, yeah, for us, again, reinforced the approach that we are taking in supporting students around identity development, finding the right institution that is both a personal and an academic match for them.
That's such a helpful primer on that study, Keith. Appreciate that so much. Folks, we are just a couple minutes away from wrapping up. So the last thing that I want to do before we do that, I'd love to invite our external panelists, Tim, Ira, and Kelly, to just wrap up in 20 to 30 seconds. What's one thing, I know it's really hard to do, what's one thing that you're excited about that's coming out of this conversation and this study that you think shows real promise, or that has the potential to really move the needle when you think about OneGoal's work in the next 3 to 5 years?
So,
Kelly, let's start with you.
Priya, I'll start.
Go ahead.
Priya, I'll start. I think the easy thing to say is, if you take that $100,000 and you multiply, and suppose you were able to extrapolate to all of OneGoal students nationwide, if you were to take that 100,000 and multiply by the 13,000 students, you're getting up to close to $1 billion of extra benefit that OneGoal students will receive as a result of being part of the program. That's
just awesome. The students that we're serving today, right now.
Right.
So helpful. Thanks, Ira. Kelly, can I toss to you next?
Sure. So I would say my takeaways and what I'm excited about are sort of twofold. I mean, one, I think the findings from this study are large magnitude. They really show that what OneGoal is doing is working. And so taking that to grow the program and thinking about how to serve more students is really exciting. And I would say I'm equally excited about the conversation we were just having about saying, like, this is great, and what more can we do to support students to sort of continue to raise that bar and decrease the gaps in graduation. So I leave the conversation very optimistic on both fronts.
Awesome, Kelly. Tim, last word before I close this up.
Just to build on that last theme, I'm frustrated by the fact that oftentimes our metric for determining a successful high school, independent of OneGoal just nationally, is college enrollment. You know, getting a student into college who drops out with debt and no credential to show for it is by many economic measures worse than, you know, the student who doesn't go to college at all. So I'm very happy that this this study is turning our attention to what is a really important metric, which is the next metric for OneGoal, which is saying, let's get students that college credential.
And that is exactly why we're all here. It's exactly what we're all about. Thank you so much to all of our incredible panelists. Big round of applause to all of you. And thanks for spending the time with us, all of our guests. One more poll is coming your way just as we wrap up. Would love to hear a little bit more about how you'd like to stay connected to us, and really want you to invite you. We know we didn't answer every single one of your questions. We really tried, but if you have a question that we didn't get to, if you'd like to connect in another way, please reach out. Please join us on social media. Visit our website to learn more. And we're so glad that you were able to be here with us today. Thanks, everybody.